Today I'm going to share something with you a little different than what I've done before. I've been working on this third-person RPG-style character controller for some time now, sort of off and on, and you may have seen it in a previous video, but recently I've been getting a little more serious about its development, and it's getting pretty complex. And that complexity is getting compounded by the fact that the game it's being made for, I've decided, is going to be online multiplayer. With everything progressing as well as it has, I wanted to just pause and take a moment and document the current state that it's in. I recently shared a demo video with a friend, and he had said he was interested in hearing more about it in detail. So instead of recording a video and sharing it like I've done in the past, I suggested that he join me so that we could look at the project together and just sort of have a conversation about it. So if you're curious about what I've been up to, or you're interested in game design, or you're interested in just seeing behind the scenes of an online multiplayer project, I think you'll enjoy listening to this conversation. So with that, I welcome Drew to the video. What I wanted to show you, Drew, is this, can I call you Drew?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
We didn't establish your name beforehand. I don't know if you're going to try to do this pseudonymously.
No, we're all we've known each other for a while. We're good.
Okay. So I wanted to show you this character controller, and you had some feedback that you kind of wanted to see a little more detail on it. So
yeah.
So I'm going to be more or less kind of going through the same motions as that video, but try to go into a little bit more detail on how everything is working.
This is cool. I've actually never I've putzed with Unity. I've never actually seen somebody working on a real project. So it's interesting.
Okay, so we've got movement, forward, back, left, and right. We can jump, punch, and you can shift to go extra fast. Okay, so now the way that the motion works is actually kind of interesting, and it's constructed in a way that I was not familiar with when I first started this project. I'm going to pull open a little bit of code. We'll try to avoid putting code on the screen as much as we can, though.
That's okay. I like code.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe your audience doesn't, though.
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? I don't know who they are. I don't have an audience.
Oh, not yet.
Yeah, okay, so this is interesting. So we've got there's an input script that is getting input from the player, and then what's happening in the move animator chunk here, all it's doing is it's just transforming that input a little bit, so we're getting some multiplication times speed depending on certain states of the character. Okay. But then it basically injects that directly into the animator.
Okay.
So
every frame the animator has the player's current speed,
yeah.
both vertical and horizontal, left and right, forward to back.
Yeah, and we can see how that plays out here. Yeah, so you remember seeing this before. You can see all these state changes as they're going.
Is there any significance to the 3 arrows on that chart versus the 1 arrow?
Yeah, it's a complex transition, so okay. It has more than one transition condition on it.
Oh, okay.
And that's because I had an edge case where things could potentially be funny there, so I needed to have more than one. So if it's descending is true, it should drop out of it immediately.
And what's the other one? It's little.
Yeah, so it can exit out if grounding. So on this side, it can exit out if grounding is true and moving is true, and it can exit out on this side if descending is true. But if none of that happens, it will eventually it'll go through the entire jumping animation and then just transition to falling.
Okay.
So that's so it basically think if you're running into a hill, and the jump happens to be really short, it can just drop it back to movement really quick.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So the input that I was showing you there, so this massive blend tree. So when you're inputting there, it's going directly into the animator. So you can see the velocity X and velocity Y.
Sure, okay.
Changing value. And then that's what's instructing this blend tree, which animations it should be blending in between.
Hey, can I ask you perhaps a stupid question? Can you just like let go of the keys for a second and show me what is the velocity, the second velocity? Why is that not centered? I would expect. Well, I mean, it's not just that it's moving, but it's like -3 right now or something.
Yeah,
like, what's going on there?
I feel like that's probably a Unity bug or something, because it's obviously it should be something like 0 right now.
It's rather amusing, yeah.
I have no idea why it's doing that.
Well, I mean, if it's not by design, that's fine. I was just curious.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing, so that second axis is forward and back. So like the Z axis, basically. But it doesn't kick into high gear until I hit the shift button. So you can only so it only has 3 back ish, but it's got up to 7 forward. And that's actually kind of by design. I wanted you to have, be able to have more awareness and like more mobility forward than backward.
Sure. Yeah,
sort
that
of
makes
harkening
sense.
back to EQ a little bit with the, like you can't.
The slow backpedaling kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't look behind you when you're sitting down and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the other thing that I've added that's actually new since the last video is I added a blend tree for idle, so you get this nice foot shuffling.
Yeah, I've seen that happen both well and poorly in other games, and I've always been really curious. Like I noticed that now in games. So what is your approach there?
Okay, so actually before we get to that, what I wanted to talk about a little bit. All of the motion of the character, well, not all of it, but a lot of it is done through the root motion of the animations. So,
can you elaborate on what you mean by that? I don't exactly understand.
Yeah. Okay. So, like in a traditional character controller, you've got a rigid body and a collider, and you basically just like push that rigid body either through force or just transforming it, from one position to the next each frame to create the motion. And then like the old school way to animate that would then be to add an animation, like a running animation, and then you just run that running clip as the character goes along. But the obvious problems that you can sort of imagine would crop up by doing that would be you'd get sliding underneath the character's feet. So the way that this works is completely different. So we take the input from the player, but we never actually move the player transform directly. We do it all through the animations. So each of these animations here have root motion associated with them. So you can see in this animation, so the character, they move their arms and legs. But there's also actual root motion in the animation. So when they animated this, like the character actually moved through space. And
so how is that actually implemented? Like my experience with Unity is like you have scripts and mono behaviors and they can communicate with each other. But like in terms of the animation system here, like what is actually moving the transform?
So on the character itself, the animator here, we have a very important checkbox. Apply root motion.
Okay.
And so what that means is that if we play an animation at the animator level, it's going to apply the root motion of those animations. And the root motion, just like at a very basic level, is just the overall movement of the character. So it basically tries to calculate the center of mass of the character, and then calculate its motion for the animation.
And that's something that's like baked into the animation itself?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something that's calculated by Unity when you import it, I believe. So like, okay, so now here's all the animations in the blend tree, and when you look at the this Cartesian plot up in the top, these are the like, this is the animations actually plotted out. So we can actually visualize this. If we start increasing the z-axis input over here in the animator, we can see that little red dot on the Cartesian plot start moving up, and it's blending between the different forward motion animations. And then of course if we add a little bit of x-axis, it'll start blending between those left and right animations as well. And the position that all these animations have on this Cartesian plot are not arbitrary. They're actually based on the root motion of the animations. So the walk animation has 0 x root motion and 1.7 z root motion. And all of these were calculated automatically. So I just loaded in all of these animations and then just hit this drop down to calculate the positions. But the point of all of this is that because all the movement is driven by root motion, the character's feet remain exceptionally well planted on the ground at all times.
Okay, yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying now. That's actually really cool.
Yeah,
I never knew that you could actually like bake that in at the animation level, but that makes sense. That's the right way to do it, you know. Otherwise, you'd be synchronizing stuff, and that just seems weird.
Yeah, yeah. And there actually is some foot inverse kinematics at play here too that help really drive that effect home.
Okay.
So her feet are pretty well planted, pretty much at all times.
Also, is she a hobbit or what? What's going on here?
No, she's just a girl.
Okay.
Nothing special.
Okay.
She doesn't have a face. That's
I noticed that actually. Yeah, I did notice that.
Yeah, it's kind of a low poly thing.
Yeah.
Doesn't match my decor at all. Now I'm going to show you the next piece, which is making this character a little more interesting. Okay, so now the editor is going to run. There we go. So the editor is running the server.
Oh. What are those are those just like test characters that you see in the game right
that's
there?
the one I tried to disable just before I launched this. I don't know why it's still there. But yeah, so this character controller is fully multiplayer ready.
Oh, crazy. So, okay, describe to me what we're seeing right here. In the bottom left, what we have Unity base, and in the top left, we have the game. Like, what is what here?
Yeah, so in the bottom left, I've built out, like, Bolt has a nice little tool, and I just pressed the debug start on Bolt scenes, and it launched the editor as a server and launched the built out and launched a client to connect to it.
Oh, crazy! Okay.
So this is like how you debug in Bolt, and this is kind of cool. Like the way that this whole thing is put together is really neat. So I'll dive a little bit into how Bolt works.
Yeah, I've never heard of Bolt before.
Yeah, so this is one of Photon's products. So this is Photon Bolt.
Okay.
And let's see. I want to look at assets. Okay, so a Bolt asset is basically a data definition, and this is the one that we're using.
Okay.
So this is the state of the character that we were just looking at. So we have a transform to track their position, a trigger attack to trigger an attack. We have floats for their velocity x and y, which seems kind of redundant, but it's it's the velocity as modified by the character controller, so it is important.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
And maybe that could be fixed somehow in the future. But basically, the velocity XY is used for animations, whereas the transform is actually used for position.
Okay.
And then we've got some bools for grounded, moving, and descending. So those are all the things that get fed into the animator. So this state tree or state graph, whatever the hell this is called.
I'll allow it.
So those are what gets fed into the animator. And so what Bolt does is basically it automatically synchronizes all of those for us. So on the character, there is a Bolt entity, and this is kind of where all the magic happens. And this is, it's definitely a little bit of a black box because you set up all of these different bits of data, and it compiles a library for you, which you reference in your scripts, and then it handles the rest. Like it does all of the state synchronization over the network.
That's actually crazy, dude. Like, so I think I've mentioned it to you, but I've been playing around with like a pretty low level implementation of like just sending packets back and forth between the client and server. and so I guess
it's a lot of work.
It is. It's a lot of work. Yeah. And so am I right in assuming that like you could think of this Kira state as a packet of information that might need to be synchronized between the client and the server?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you're defining a bunch of states, and you're basically telling in the script you tell Bolt like up here in the attached function. So I override a special Bolt method here, and I set the transform to the this transform, and I set the animator to this animator, and so those two lines of code inform Bolt, that we are using the Kira state, and that we are assigning these particular components to be synchronized over the network.
That's really interesting. I mean, and presumably this will take care of like any like client-side prediction that needs to happen with the movement and all that stuff.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, and my script doesn't implement all of those functions quite yet, and it also.
Okay, so you would have to actually do some of that yourself.
Well, you have to define like, you have to define how you're implementing it. And what's confusing is that this character controller runs on both the, if you have two players playing together on your machine, you have two copies of that character controller that are both running. So you have to do this kind of stuff, like if is owner, we set up player input. But if the local machine is not the owner of the networked object, then we don't set up the player input because it's presumably being controlled entirely by Bolt.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. That makes sense.
Okay. So now this will make it even more fun.
Yeah. It's hard to think too, like what has to exist in both the client and the server, and what's the right way to like pull that stuff apart to make sure that you can share it properly and all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah. Okay. It's loaded.
Oh, nice.
So I'm just going to run through this really quick.
This looks great, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, this is me just screwing around with some ideas.
Yeah.
So now...
Oh, you can start as server or start as client. That's interesting.
Yeah. So like, basically, this game runs as, player-hosted servers.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not really sure what that's going to look like down the road, but that's what it looks like right now. So that's the login process. But what's happening behind the scenes is a little more complicated.
Of course.
So what I've done is I've stood up a Rails server on Heroku.
Oh, wow.
And it implements devise and JWT for tokens.
Okay.
So you can sign in with your email and password. It responds with your email, the user ID, some other junk, and this is the one important bit that's on there, the server permission. And the other important bit is here. It returns an authorization token. So this token here, this is now our authorization token when we want to do something else. So we can, and I only have one endpoint for which this actually does something. So you can see some secret sauce.
Yes.
So you just paste that into the authorization header. And so now we're just doing a get to this the secret URL, and it responds with the secret sauce.
So when you choose the client option, do you have to choose a server to connect to, or how does that work right now?
Yeah, so that's actually let me just pull up a build.
Is that part of Bolt also, like that handles that part for you?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm going to go through in a little more detail what's actually happening here with this run through. Okay, so I'm going to authenticate here as myself. And so what it has done thus far is it sent my username and password up to the Rails server. It responded with a token that I can now use for further actions on the server. And right now there aren't any further actions aside from that authorization. But it did come back and tell the client that this user has the server authorization, so we can start a server.
Okay.
And then on the other one, will be the user at example. Oh, and actually we can see this is actually hitting the server.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So now what this one is doing is it has done the same thing. It's calling out to the Rails server. It has come back and said this is an actual user, a proper username and password. And then it calls out to the Bolt network and asks if there's any games with a particular ID. And Bolt responded that there's one running. Here it is, and then it.
Why would games have a different ID?
So like when you're set up with Bolt, you get an app ID. Just so
okay, I got you.
Yeah, it's just a random ID so that they can differentiate the incoming requests.
So I noticed that it automatically connected you, though. Would it prompt you if there was more than one game open, or?
Right now, it won't. I've sort of intentionally shut the door on that.
Okay, so you would automatically get connected to the one game that somebody had created? Okay,
yeah,
the first one.
Back.
Okay, cool.
Once I decide why and when a second server would be out there, I can figure that out. Oh yeah, and the one bit of interaction we have with this scene is that we can see that this chest is magic. Yeah, totally. I like the crosshair too. I was playing Counter-Strike last night. That's what it makes me think of. Yeah, so I just a lot of the control mechanism that I have right now is mimicking just other games, and there's sort of different styles to controls for RPGs, and particularly well, I don't know. I guess if you could say that third and first person are sort of one style, and then even within those, there's kind of other styles. So like when I was playing Project 1999, so classic EQ.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting that, well, the original mappings don't even use WSAD at all. Like, it's mapped to the arrows.
They're pretty bad, like out of the box.
So, yeah, but then it's really interesting because so it works a lot the same way that Warcraft does, where you've got basic movement controls, but then if you want to like steer the character with your mouse, you have to right click.
Yes.
Well, that's a bummer because like the right click is like that's some pretty valuable real estate. And and maybe a bummer is not quite the right word, because like camera control is a big deal, and the way that that controller worked out is that it enabled stuff like kiting, things like that. Having that fine camera control, like that is a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. Like,
so I don't want to downplay the importance at all, but
they would depend on that really heavily, right? In a lot of situations, like.
Yeah, for sure.
Pretty fundamental.
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting how just simply by, you know, deciding whether or not you need to right click to lock the camera behind the character like this, that sends you down a path of development like right away. That changes how it works.
Right.
So this is sort of a more modern MMO style, I think. Elder Scrolls Online is pretty similar to this.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, where you actually, so like, will there be, because I know in ESO, you don't actually target stuff, right? It's actually like there is hit detection with your like proximity of enemies and stuff.
Yeah.
Have you thought about that yet?
Yeah, a little bit. And I like that style. I don't really know. I haven't figured out like, how difficult it's going to be to do that. Because, we're talking about like hit boxes and crap
yeah,
like
especially
that.
synchronized between a client and a server. Like I think of games like we were talking recently when I was talking to you about Dark Souls. Like that game has really, really tight and very precise hit detection, and it's really nice. But like Elder Scrolls is a little bit more hack and slash to me, and like both are awesome in their own way. But I guess you just have to make a decision about like how you want it to work.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much it, man. That's all. Yeah, we went through all of the character controller stuff. Went through all of my networking and server stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think if there's anything else we should really talk about.
What are you going to work on next? Like, what's on your roadmap?
So
the next couple things.
So this magic detection here is actually an important hint on the next piece.
Okay.
So like I want characters to be able to detect magic, and they're going to be able to do it in a number of different ways. And actually, like the way that I've been running this this project so far is just sort of like prototyping smaller things and sort of prototyping them to completion, and then deciding which pieces of it are going to survive into the next prototype. Mm-hmm. And so the next prototype is going to be this magic detection prototype, where I think it's going to be basically like a game of finding magical objects in a scene and collecting them or something.
Okay.
So like you'll have these different magic or controlling the other character.
I was wondering what's going on there. I was like, is somebody else in your game? What's going on?
Oh man, that happened with so we published Garbage Trash Adventure to itch.io.
Yeah.
And I launched this, launched a server and was playing with it because I was showing some people, and I had my boy sitting next to me playing it, and
oh, that's great.
And we can have an army.
Yeah.
Let's get a little closer. And so we were just like goofing around on it, and all of a sudden there was like another person in the game, and so I contacted my buddy, and I was just like, "Are you playing right now?" Because I knew that only a few people had the game like downloaded and could play it, but somebody could have picked it up off of itch. So I contacted my buddy to see if he was playing. He's just like, "No, what?" And I was just like, "There's people freaking playing our game."
Oh, that's so awesome, dude.
Just like rogue people on itch.io that just have nothing better to do.
That's so awesome.
Garbage truck adventure game.
Dude, how much time did you spend on like E-Bombs Worlds back in the day playing those Flash games? I imagine that's like the same genre.
Yeah, that's.
I haven't played Garbage Trucks, so I maybe I'm slandering it. I don't know, but.
Oh baby. So the magic detection, it's going to be like its own game, and it sort of like draws from the principle, a designing principle I have, which is like there shouldn't be any throwaway elements within the game. Like whatever activities there are in the game, like that activity by itself should be like an intrinsically fun thing to do.
Yeah, I like that. Okay.
So with magic, like what I'm going to do is basically make this magic detection game. So you're going to have like different tools that you can use. So think like 3 different abilities. One is like your mass detection ability, where it just just tells you if magic is close, you know, so sort of like, there's some Pathfinder magic detection spells that work like that, where it's basically just a Boolean, true or false. You know, do I detect magic? Ding-a-ling-a-ling. Yes, you do.
Okay.
And so the idea is, you know, you run around with that ability, and then when you get something, then you can switch to a finer detection ability, which will be like a cone or something. You know, so think like waving your hand around, trying to find it, and then you'll pick up some sort of directionality from that. And then the third kind will be like your close range, which will be the targeting reticle. When it's over the top of something, it's just like boom, there it is, and then you walk over and collect it.
Yeah, so you know what that actually reminds me of is there was you never actually played Ultima Online, did you?
No.
Okay, so there was a system in that game where like certain monsters you would kill would drop a treasure map. The treasure map, if you had the appropriate skills, would show. First, you would decode the map, and it would show you a very rough area in the game world of like where the treasure would be. And then when you got there, you would have to use like some surveying tools to find like the 5-screen area that it might be at, and then you would have to go dig around with your shovel and try to find the exact tile that it was on. And it was actually like this very satisfying kind of mini game that you would play.
That's super cool. I wonder if that's an inspiration for Sea of Thieves.
Sea of Thieves.
Yeah, similar.
I played that game for a little bit, and I was really charmed by it, but I just never really stuck around. Right. Yeah, the art style was beautiful, and it was nice.
Yeah. So the way that you were describing treasure maps, there's a lot of elements that I think are pretty similar there.
Okay.
And of course, it's a pirate game, so you have to have good treasure finding.
Well, of course, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Drew. That was a ton of fun to record with you, man. And thanks for watching. Let me know if you've got any questions or if there's anything in particular you'd like to see in future videos. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.